I should stop that. Hey guys, thanks for joining us on the Political Deep Dive. This is Dave Valente, joined this week by Dan, the man Fishman. How you doing, Dan?
I am doing just dandy.
Just dandy. All right.
You'll
cool.
forgive the pun.
So last week, apologized. My wife came home for the first time in a month, so I was like, time to spend time with the wife. So, but this week, I am very excited to talk about kind of one of the topics I'm very passionate about, which is the Middle East. I've studied the Middle East. I got a degree in international affairs from Kennesaw State University and a degree in diplomacy from Norwich University up in Vermont, and focused on the Middle East quite a bit, the broader Middle East generally. But let me kind of dive into what we're going to talk about in context. So tonight I'm going to do a little bit of a historical review, but I'm not going to go too far back. I mean, we could talk about the Middle East from, being the cradle of civilizations, the Mesopotamia Valley, the Hittites and the Sumer and the Akkadians. What we're going to focus on is, at least from a historical perspective, is stuff that's happened since World War I. And we're also not going to go through the entire broad Middle East. So we're not talking about.
We're starting with King David and the Philistines.
No, but we're talking about mainly the Gulf countries and the Levant area. We can, and we'll probably include Egypt in this discussion as well, because that really is kind of a bridge country to North Africa. But we won't talk about some of the other countries that, say, are in the Arab League, which spans from Mauritania all the way over to Dubai and down to the Comoros Islands. Because really we're trying to kind of focus this on, because if we did an entire Arab League discussion, it would take forever. So, but that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. I did want to lay down kind of a historical context of what we're talking about. Some of the big things that have happened since World War I. So during World War I, most of the Arab, like the Gulf states and the Levant, aligned against the Ottoman Turks, because the Ottoman Empire kind of held sway over the region, and they wanted to get out from under that. So they allied under the Brits and the U.S. and
Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia, yeah, famous story. And there was promises made to certain families within the Middle East that they would get, a lot of them really wanted the kingdom of what eventually became Saudi Arabia, the area of Najd and Hijaz. That ended up going to a guy named Ibn Saud, who had unified some of the families in the area.
The Bedouin, the
Bedouin families, and the folks in Medina and Mecca, and out of World War I, we got something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So if you look at the map of the Middle East, the borders that you see there were most, especially in the northern part of the Levant area and south to Saudi Arabia, were drawn out of this agreement, where it basically partitioned the Middle East between the Brits and the French. So the French retained Lebanon. The French retained, let's say hi to my sister, Care Bear.
How's it going? Hey, Daniel, how are you?
Yeah, let me get it right once and for all. Kara or Kara?
Kara.
Kara. All right, good.
Thank you, Care Bear.
Yep, that's good.
Hey, Craig. So, we're talking about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which drew most of the borders that currently exist in the Middle East. So you're talking about Lebanon, Syria, what was Palestine at the time, Jordan, the northern Saudi border, Iraq. So these countries were drawn out and kind of partitioned amongst the Brits and the French. So the French took Lebanon and Syria. The Brits took most of everything else as not really kind of a colonial, but more of an administrative role. They handed it over to these families. Families became monarchs of these countries. Some worked, some did not. Ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia worked. His family still runs the things. The Al Assad family in Syria still work. The um, uh, King Abdullah's family in Jordan still work. It's but places where it didn't work, like Iraq, have been kind of a constant thorn in the side of the region for a long time. It didn't really work. The French mandates really didn't work out in Syria or Lebanon. So, 1938, oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia, which now put the United States and Saudi Arabia into a long-term relationship. The Saudi U.S. Saudi oil company eventually becomes Saudi Aramco. Um, it really is kind of it does destabilize the entire region because the Americans actually, in this case, really did give the Saudis a really good deal compared to other countries like Britain giving Iran just a really crap deal when it came to their oil. And so the U.S. kind of destabilized the regions when it came to Iran's reaction to oil and led to, unrest in other countries like Egypt and where oil nationalization became an issue. So the next big thing that happened in the region was, of course, 1948, when the state of Israel was declared and led to three major wars. 1948, which was the war for independence. The Arab countries immediately invade after the declaration of Israel being a state, and the Israelis take a while to beat them back. Yeah, Care Bear.
I just want to say I'm going to turn my camera off for a minute. My daughter just came in from the hospital. I'll be right back.
Okay, cool. It took a while for the Israelis to kind of turn the tide in that war, but they did do so with the help of a surprising country in Czechoslovakia. Provided them weapons and tanks and things like that to help stem the tide in that conflict and secure Israeli independence. There were two further wars regarding Israel, major wars. In 1967, there was a 6-day war. And in 1973, there was the Yom Kippur War, where the Arab forces used an Israeli holiday to just pour across the border, but they were eventually beaten back by the Israelis in all three instances. Around this time, we're starting to see, like I was talking about with Saudi Aramco, we're starting to see oil nationalization and socialist unity movements, Arab wanting to get countries together and become a unified Arab state. One of the things you hear, and it lasts through until through Saddam Hussein, was the idea of Baathism. Baathism was largely a socialist movement in the Middle East that talked about Arab unity, wanting to form like an Arab state, but they could never really get that off the ground. They did have a couple of instances where countries did kind of merge. Syria and Egypt did for a while, but it fell apart over who would control it. Of course,
Saddam Hussein tried to do it with Kuwait.
Saddam Hussein, yeah, but that was a little different.
But he wasn't. They were the Ba'ath Party.
Yes, Saddam Hussein was probably the last of the true. I guess you could say that the Assads in Syria are the last of the Baathists that are still around, although the ideology is not as prominent in the Middle East as it once was.
And I think it's worth mentioning, too, that a lot of what was happening in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was a proxy war for the great powers.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the United States was securing oil resources. The Soviets wanted to secure oil resources. And the reason why, the U.S. really started getting more involved in Israel was the idea that the Czechs had helped them so greatly in 1948 that they were afraid the Israelis would move into a Soviet sphere of influence. And we started paying attention to them much greater after that. But let's see, 1970s, we start talking about oil embargoes. Anybody who lived in the 70s remember the long lines. The Saudis were using oil as a weapon to get concessions of when it came to Israel, the Palestinian movement, and that type of stuff. Um, it really creates imbalance in the region, especially with oil like Iraq versus Kuwait and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which would later fester in the 1980s and 1990s, as we all know. In the 1980s, we start talking about rising fundamentalism within the region, the kidnapping of even though it was kind of directed at the hands of the Iranians, it was done in Lebanon and Palestine. The kidnapping of American professors, professionals, and holding them hostage, and then we head into the of course in the 80s we have the Iran-Iraq War. You're uh, talking about the use of chemical weapons, how that became a big thing in the Middle East, and how that became a flashpoint. Um, and then the Gulf War, and I think this is kind of the common era that a lot of us remembers. The Gulf War starts. Um, we're talking, uh, you know, August 2nd of 1990. The United States has been a continuous period of war since August 2nd of 1990, and we're talking about the invasion of Kuwait that begins on August 2nd of 1990. We do the Operation Desert Storm, but that doesn't end there. Once we win the war, we do the no-fly zone for ages until 2003, when we decide to invade Iraq again to get Saddam Hussein out of power. Um, it also under the broad umbrella of terrorism. One thing we can talk about in 1990s, the kind of flashpoint that led to a lot of the terrorism we saw in 2000s was the fact after the war we kept troops in Saudi Arabia, and that was one of the things that Osama bin Laden cited in his fatwa against the United States was the fact that we had kept troops in the Holy Land of Islam.
Right. Although we'd had bases there before
Yeah,
Desert Storm as well.
yeah, absolutely. And then, so 2000s, 2010s, we're talking terrorism. 2010s, we're also talking about the Arab Spring, which destabilizes some of the countries within the Middle East and causes reactions within the other countries of the Middle East. So we can talk about how Mohammed bin Salman, the current crown prince of Saudi Arabia, is really a reaction of the Arab Spring. It's his push to modernize Saudi Arabia is a reaction to what happened in the Arab Spring and trying to prevent that kind of takeover from happening in his country.
He's trying to give them as little as he can, but keep the people pacified.
Yeah,
Coddled, mollycoddled, I would say.
hay in the barn of human cattle, I think.
Yeah.
Is how I put it. He's loosening up restrictions when it comes to women driving, women being in public. So some of it's good, some of it is, I mean, it's very concerning. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi of the Washington Post, um, the funding the invasion of Yemen is concerning.
Well,
There are lots of bad things going on with MBS.
more than that, I mean, it's been right. It's not like they haven't had 50 years of American television of exposure to our culture. They've dealt with female prime ministers and female secretaries of state. They know that women can do the job. There's no excuse other than, misogyny for the state that they keep women in. And everything that we do with Saudi Arabia should be done in that context. I actually personally would prefer that, we not deal with countries, not have any business relations with countries where women don't have the franchise, where they don't have the right to vote.
Yeah.
Seems like a very simple thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk pretty much almost everybody in Saudi Arabia really doesn't have the franchise. I mean, they do have what is called a majlis, a consultative body, but that really is a named by the king group. It's
Yep.
not something that they go and vote for. Other states within the Middle East are a little bit better. In fact, one of the better states before it completely fell apart was Yemen. Actually had elections from time to
Yeah.
time, but the other states within the Middle East just don't.
Well, I mean, actually, Iraq and Iran were significantly better on women's rights. Iran pre-revolution,
Yes.
pre-revolution law, and we've talked about the movie Persepolis. People who haven't seen it, fantastic, won an Oscar, and talks about what happened in Iran.
Yeah, fantastic. Iran eventually will have its own show. We can talk about Iran. I can talk about Iran for days. So, but yeah, Baghdad back in the 60s and 70s and that was one of the things talking about the Baathists. While they were socialist and Arab unity and all that stuff, they're also secularist, and they were really pushing the idea of Western dress. And that actually did lead to a lot of the fundamentalism we saw creeping back up in the 80s and 90s, and now that we're seeing is that what they call West toxification is the idea that American ideas, American culture, toxifying the Islamic senses in the Middle East. Whether it doesn't even matter if it's Saudi Arabia, where the Wahhabis hold sway, or some of the greater regional like Afghanistan and Iran. That idea is a kind of a unifying force against American influence, keeping American culture out of there, away from the people. So, but yeah, so Saudi Arabia, for me, it's hard. But let me give a little bit of background on Saudi Arabia, because traditionally the way that monarchies pass within the Middle East is different than, say, what happens within England, where father has son inherits the throne, or daughter inherits the throne, and it goes down that way. Generally, in Saudi Arabia and some of these other Middle Eastern monarchies, it goes from first king to brother to brother to brother. Now, of course, a lot of the countries in the Middle East allow for polygamous marriage, so they have 4 or 5 wives, so they have tons of brothers.
Ibn Saud had 72 children as well.
Yeah, and Ibn Saud had
72 male children. They didn't count the female children.
Yeah, of course. So, this Mohammed bin Salman is the first of his generation to take over. Well, he's crown prince right now, but he technically is the de facto leader, because his father is he's had strokes. He's not doing well. He's in his 80s. So this is the first of the young generation to kind of step in. And there's potential, that Mohammed bin Salman can have a 50-year reign within Saudi Arabia. His family, they do tend to live a little bit longer. They're about 80 years old generally when they pass on. So, and he didn't come by it, normally. There are a few more brothers that they could have gone through to get to eventually Mohammed bin Salman. But when his father took the palace, he gathered all the brothers together for some kind of conference in Riyadh and took them all hostage and had them all renounce their claims to the throne. So he was able to name Mohammed bin Salman as the current crown prince of Saudi Arabia. So, that's how Saudi Arabia works and operates now. Again, it's not a democratic administration by any stretch of the imagination. It is very autocratic, and we've touched on some of the modernizing things. one of the interesting modernizing things that they're doing is this thing called Neom. Have you? I posted in our little group chat a video about Neom. Have you? Have
I'm
either of
not
you heard
familiar
about
with
it?
it.
All right, Neom is a concept city. Now, in the Middle
Oh,
East, you've seen several concept cities kind of pop up. There's the Palm Island in Dubai, the World in Dubai,
yep.
um, and they do some planned cities out in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. This is a brand new one, and it's innovative in how they're approaching building the city rather than building it in a big cluster like most cities are built out of a central downtown and moved out. They're building along a line. The line is I want to say 100 kilometers, so 60 miles. Um, that they're going to build kind of on this central line and build like a high speed rail that can get you to and from the end of the line in rapid succession. They're they've got water desalination plants, all kinds of stuff to do this. The Saudis are trying to diversify their economy with their oil wealth right now, which is good because oil is not always going to be the big thing. And it makes sense. And if this city works, it could change how we do cities, at least building new cities.
Yeah, I think the city model is probably done. Just the nature of the communication revolution now.
Hmm.
People may voluntarily choose to live together for scaled economy conservation and stuff like that. But I think most people, given the option, would you rather live in a 100-floor apartment building, which is incredibly economical and environmentally responsible, or would you rather have a private house in the woods? People are going to prefer privacy.
Sure.
And so,
City girl, I'm gonna disagree.
so some people will, but
Yeah.
I
Right.
think that if you were to look at the trend, the cities are emptying.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, and I think COVID almost accelerates that in that people realize that you put a whole bunch of people together in a cramped area,
Yep.
the chances of disease spread will accelerate. Now, maybe in 100 years, people forget that lesson, like we did with the flu, the Spanish flu, for lack of a better term. Uh, but you know, uh, we've got cities of
Yeah.
20 some odd million now.
I mean, it's an interesting idea, the vertical line, because of you can build a loop or whatever fast transportation in between the spots, but you're going to expand horizontally as well, and it's only a matter of time before people want to do other things. The art of city building, we have all done
Yeah.
in SimCity and all the other various games. And I mean, the one thing that we know is that the engineered city always fails. The thing that works best is when people are innovative in their cities. And so, although I like the idea that, the Saudis are experimenting with this thing, fundamentally, if you say, which city is better, Washington, D.C., which was incredibly planned, right, and laid out and all that stuff,
Yeah.
or Houston, which was built, through entire deregulation, people have voted with their feet.
Sure. Sure. I mean, they at least monetarily, yeah. I mean, all the money's there. So,
Yeah,
um,
I mean, DC is capped vertically, so that has
yeah,
something to do with it, and it's capped, in size and stuff like that. But fundamentally, you find people, when people have the option to move wherever the hell they want, they generally don't rush into the big cities anymore. They'd
sure.
rather have a thing where, and if anything, I think the automated car, which is going to come on, is going to increase that even more, right? Your automated car is going to essentially be like it'll have a sleeper mode, just like a train, and you'll get in it and you'll sleep in your bed while it drives you into work. And so you won't mind leaving the house at 7 o'clock in the morning because you'll get another 90 minutes of sleep while you drive in.
Sure. Sure. So another big thing that we've got going on in the Middle East is, of course, war. We've had war going on in the Middle East really since World War One. There's been some sort of conflict almost every year. The current big one right now is the conflict in Yemen, which is probably the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. Uh, right now it's a proxy war. We talked about proxy war with the United States and the Soviet Union. This is a proxy war between the Saudis and the Iranians, and for control over. Yemen was always a bad idea. Um, at least the way they set it up. They tried to force together two disparate people, and this is kind of the lesson we see all over a lot of the colonial maps, is that they tried to force together two disparate people with two different disparate belief systems in Yemen. They had the Kingdom of Yemen, which was kind of the western chunk of Yemen. Oh, there we go. And then we had the more Sunni side, which was the western side of.
I always say, always look on the Sunni side of life. Sorry, or as the Saudis say, if you're not Sunni, you're Shiite.
Whoa.
I'll be here all night.
Dad jokes.
God.
Yeah, but it's now this proxy war, which the United States tried to keep out of. Well, it funded originally. The Biden administration has really tried to keep out of and stop funding, but I think with the current war in Ukraine, we've had to modify some of those stances when it comes to the support of the Saudi side of this war.
I think too, we sort of glossed over something that's sort of in the past, but the rise of ISIS or ISIL or whatever you want to call it, and the fact that there is this idea in Islam of a religious state that would really span all the world, but at least in the beginning, span the Muslim nations. And Iran certainly subscribes to that idea to some extent. They just think that they'll be the ones in charge of it.
Yeah, well, both sides think that the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia think that they're going to be the ones that
Right.
do it as well.
The Wahhabists are enemies of the Saudi government, sort of.
Sort of.
Right. Yeah.
They got to use the Wahhabis to stay in power. I mean, their secret police is pretty much the Wahhabis.
Right. They're the enemy of the Saudi government in the same way Republicans are the enemies of American government.
Yeah.
Yes. Indeed.
Kind of the same religion too.
Yep.
But yeah, to me, Yemen has been just kind of the forgotten black mark on the world right now. The ability to get any kind of aid into that country is just not happening because the Iranians don't trust the Saudis and the UAE, and the Saudis and the UAE don't trust the Iranians, and they're allowing children to die of very treatable illnesses. Stuff that shouldn't be killing people in 2022 is killing a lot of Yemeni.
And it's especially crazy because Yemen is eminently reachable. It has miles and miles of coastline, and millions of foreign national boats travel past it all the time. So there's no reason why aid couldn't get there, except for, again, this sort of proxy war that's going on. And we've seen, I was just going to say, we've seen some interesting turns in there recently. Unfortunately, like most proxy wars, it becomes a showcase for modern technology. And so you've seen a lot more sort of drone terrorist strikes, that sort of thing happening in the Yemen conflict that, are really terrible, but also an indication that things are probably going to get a lot worse.
And here's the messed up thing about it is that Yemen really doesn't have a whole lot. It's not like they're fighting over oil. They're not fighting over any natural resources. Really, the most famous thing is maybe coffee that they have there, but that's pretty much it.
Right.
And so they're just killing people to kill people. in the most barbaric ways possible now. So, yeah, it's been a very demoralizing to watch what's going on there. To know that we tried to make a stand with the Biden administration, but the Biden administration now knows that to get Saudis to put more gas into the market, they're going to have to moderate their stance when it comes to Yemen. So that's going to mean more kids die because we need gas.
Yeah.
Let's see elsewhere in the region. Another flashpoint. Did you guys see a few years ago when that port exploded in Beirut?
Yep.
Yeah. So
We could miss that.
my
Beirut, frequently referred to as the Paris of the Middle East.
yes, Beirut was the city of Beirut in the 60s was just a metropolitan, beautiful city that was very westernized, very very liberal in how people interacted with one another. Again, Lebanon is a kind of an outlier within the Middle East because it has such a diverse population. It has Christians, it has
It actually has
Muslims,
more Christians than Muslims, right?
well,
I'll look it up.
yeah, it's very close. I think the Muslims, with the inclusion of the Palestinians, now
Yeah.
kind of hold the majority. But they have Muslims, both Shiite and Sunni backgrounds, generally more
You're
Shiite.
right. 67% Muslim now.
Yeah, but it's not
32%
all.
Christian.
Yeah, again, it's not all Shiite. It's, there's Druze, there's
Right. Right. I think that's what it is. Is that Christians are larger than any of the Muslim sects
yeah,
because it's 32% Christian, 31% Sunni, 31% Shia, and then Alawites and Ismailis and other small.
yeah,
branches.
smaller groups. So, but this the country has just been mismanaged. It's been a part of a proxy war between Iran and Israel. There was a massive civil war from 1973 until I think the 1990s that the civil war ran through that really just destroyed Beirut. And they've never really been able to get their footing again. It seems like every time Beirut and Lebanon starts to get their footing again, either the Iranians do something to antagonize the Israelis come in and take out the Palestinians. They just get knocked over every time they try and get up.
Right. Lebanon, one of the cardinal rules of war is that you never want to fight a war on your turf. You want to fight a
Yep.
war on somebody else's turf. And so the Iranians and the Syrians tend to launch their attacks from Lebanon. And so there's a point in time where Israel established a 5-mile border inside of Lebanon, saying,
Yeah.
even though it's Lebanese territory, we're going to keep everybody out of this. So this is the demilitarized zone because it is one of the largest land borders with Israel.
Yep.
From southern Lebanon into northern Israel.
At least with population. I mean, you got some long borders with Jordan that
Right.
are
Right.
they're
And,
in the middle of the desert. So
right. And now that the Sinai has been given back too, that border is pretty long.
yeah. But yeah, Lebanon should be just an absolute jewel. I mean, it should be. I mean, the people, everybody I've met from Lebanon in my life have been just the absolute salt of the earth people, whether they're Christian, Maronite Christian, or Muslim or whatever. They are just the salt of the earth people, and they're just tired of war. But they don't. It feels like they don't have a choice in what goes on there.
Very
There's
much
been
not.
there's been a push to push the Syrian for the longest time. The Syrians really held sway within Lebanon, but they just have they were able to push them out in the early 2000s after the assassination of former Prime Minister Hariri. They were able to get the Syrians out at that point, but it seems like the Iranians have just replaced them. So hopefully the Lebanese can get some stability. But
I mean, like every place in the Middle East, it is a tradition of, you go back more than 200 years, a tradition of peace, beautiful country, merchants, wonderful craftsmen, all that sort of stuff. But we live in this era where people have been forced to be polarized, and Lebanon is just seen as this. That's where you launch all your campaigns from against Israel.
Yeah,
and so they bore the brunt.
yeah, unfortunately, whether it's them or Gaza now, Gaza's been getting it now the last week. So
Yeah, I mean, it is the same thing. All these people are being held hostage, essentially. Most of the civilians who live there have no interest in war, but people want to fight war from there rather than, launching plane attacks, right? Syria has the capacity, if they wanted to. They have an air force. They could launch airstrikes against Israel. They don't do that, right? Iran has the same capacity, right?
I'll give you 3 reasons.
Yeah.
1948, 1967, 1973.
Right. Well, and that's exactly the thing about it, is that the Israelis have shown, they are superlative in defense. One of the fascinating things about it too, and this is one of the things that contrasts, I think, with the other countries, is that in Israel, everybody's required to do 2 years in the army. Everybody's current favorite Israeli, Gal Gadot, talks about her training as a commando, right? Hand-to-hand combat, all that stuff. And you contrast with that the fact of what are women allowed to do in the Arab countries? Nothing.
Yeah.
And so those are it's a very stark contrast.
It is interesting. Well, I mean, most of the countries do require some form of conscription into military service. It just seems that the Israelis do a lot better than all the other countries.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, does Egypt have conscription? I mean, if we're going to rank the countries, right? Egypt is, or each of the countries in terms of economic power. Okay. Yeah. Israel's in a league by itself. But then we talk about the Arab countries. Egypt is really the biggest economic power there because it's the largest country. Population wise, it dwarfs the rest of the Middle East.
90 million, I believe, is the population of Egypt.
And, as a result, they are knocking on the door always of being able to do big things, good things. And in fact, if you look at their wealth, since one of the things we sort of missed in the timeline was 1976, the Sadat and Begin peace treaty brokered by Jimmy Carter. And since that time, Egypt's economy has done nothing but rise.
Yep.
Egypt and Israel have had a pretty good relationship during that time, although they haven't been, bestest buddies. They haven't gone to war. They haven't had even indirect conflicts, as opposed to what's happened with Syria. And I mean, Jordan, not so much. Jordan also is on the more moderate side of things, but certainly Syria, and then, proxies through Iran, Iraq to a certain extent. Saddam Hussein was paying $25,000 for families of suicide bombers in Palestine. And then, of course, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But now, we also should talk about these breaks that we've seen, right? UAE and Qatar and
Bahrain,
right now, all have economic relations with Israel.
I think to an extent, and I think one thing where we can draw some of the distinction now is that once Yasser Arafat died, I think the unifying force behind the Palestinian movement really kind of dissipated there. You saw the Gazans really break away from the West Bank, and it really is no longer as big of a cause célèbre within the greater Middle East to support Palestinian right of return and all that stuff that they really push.
Right. I mean, it's interesting too because Arafat is probably the best example. I mean, there are a lot of really good examples of failed American foreign policy, but Ron Paul points out that when Arafat died, he was a billionaire, and his people were starving.
Yeah.
Right, literally starving to death, no medicine, and that money came mostly from the United States and Western allies.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a story repeated all over impoverished nations throughout the world. Look at half of the African countries where
Yeah,
leaders became millionaires and billionaires to uh, you know hell, every day I get an email from somebody, former African dictator, saying let me funnel my money through your bank account.
yeah.
That doesn't work, sorry.
No, but it is one of those things that when we talk about the other tragedies, we do eventually have to get to the fact that the Palestinians have had it pretty terrible, and the problem for them is that nobody wants them, right? All the other Arabs also hate the Palestinians. If you get involved in any of their language or culture, they are thought of as the worst ethnic group. And a lot of the fight over what's happening with the Palestinians is because the Arabs, the Jordanians, the Syrians, etc., don't want Palestinian refugees in their country.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of destabilizing when it comes to putting people into these. You take in a large Palestinian population, and they've been there for, we're going on 2 or 3 generations now that
Yep.
they've been in these countries, whether it's Jordan or Lebanon or Syria. And once you get to that point, you almost feel like you should be a citizen, that you should have rights within those countries, and they don't. They really have no rights, and every once in a while they agitate, and it gets into a firestorm of the Jordanian government or the Syrian government cracking down on Palestinian refugees and trying to force them back over the border. Yeah, you're right. The while the idea of making Israel the boogeyman, and I'm not saying that Israel is not clean on this, but um, they
Right.
the
There is
look at Jordan. Look at your own house before you criticize the Israeli house as well.
Yep. There is, yeah, and there's, one of my favorite examples and one that people don't talk about a lot is in 2005, when the Israelis withdrew from Gaza, they left behind this amazing agricultural facility called Gush Katif, and essentially it was the largest single producer of oranges in Europe, greenhouses, bug-free, stuff like that, and they just essentially ceded it to the Palestinians. And Arafat had them destroy it because he didn't want that wealth for the Palestinian people.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Iraq. Still an area of instability within the region. It hasn't recovered from either of the U.S. invasions. Um, of the countries within the Middle East, was probably the one that got smashed together in the most ill-conceived way. Um, if you look at a map when it was smashed together, there is a southern Shiite majority that are belong to the Iranian majority, the Twelver sect of Shiite. Then there's the central section, which is where Saddam Hussein came from, which was the Sunni Arab group, and then to the north is the Kurdish population, which are Sunni, but they're not Arabs. And so smashing this group together and really, this is why Iraq failed. Their monarchy failed, is that immediately the Sunnis and the Shiites and the Kurds really started fighting amongst each other. and was unstable from World War One. There was some stability during World War II, but that was because of heavy, British and American presence within the country. And then after the wars and after the colonialism started dying off, Iraq really, it was kind of like a, prime minister or president of the month club until
Yeah.
the late 70s when Saddam Hussein took over as vice president, took over from the president, which he deposed and became the leader of Iraq with just a brutal governmental style. I mean, what if you want to see something very chilling? Look at the first Ba'ath Congress meeting after Saddam Hussein took power. There's a video out there, and there's Saddam Hussein sitting up at the dais with a few other officials, and all the Ba'ath Party members are in that room, and they're saying they just read off a name, and the person will be grabbed, taken out of the room, and you hear a shot.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you see these forced coalitions of countries, and we've seen a bunch of them, right? Yugoslavia, Iraq,
Sudan.
yeah. In order to rule that, to keep it together, the model is, a strong man who suppresses all rebellion. And probably, right, a million terrible things happened in Iraq. But among the worst, if you consider, we've already committed the sin of invading and stuff like that, we could have fixed all that, right? The Baker plan was 28 states in Iraq. I mean, I don't want to say federalism, but, with each state being able to set its own rules. The problem was the Turks didn't like it because there were several Kurdish states. And the oil companies didn't like it because then they would have to negotiate with all these these different states to get oil from the fields down to Basra. So we could have fixed all of those things. But once again, instead of giving people autonomy and letting work things out, we had a foreign policy that was driven by foreign and corporate interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can talk about the Kurds. The Kurds, I mean, it's a sad situation. The Kurds have been promised independence they're promised independence at the end of World War One, and where there was supposed to be a Kurdistan, it never came to fruition. And now, anytime there's a mention of a Kurdistan, the Turks are chomping at the bit to punch somebody over it. Whether it's going into Syria, whether it's going because Kurdistan, the way it lays, the historical lands of Kurdistan overlap Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. So every time somebody starts mentioning this, the Turks will want to invade, the Syrians will want to invade, the Iranians will want to invade, and really kind of the only semi-autonomous homeland for the Kurds right now is in northern Iraq, but that faces from time to time invasions from Turkey for harboring the PKK.
And let's talk about what the Kurds did and sacrificed in the defeat of ISIS. They were the fighters.
Well, what they didn't sacrifice in the defeat of the Ottoman Turks. I mean, they have grievance to have their own independent homeland, and should, by my estimation, should have their own independent homeland with control of their natural resources under their ground, which is a shit ton of oil.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I think as Liberty people, obviously, we support smaller voluntary collections of people. And so, the Kurds, heck, the Scottish, anybody who wants their own country, I want them to have their own country. With the exception of the national divorce plan being pushed around in the United States. But other than that, I mean, honestly, the United States shouldn't have to do that because we actually have that written in our Constitution. It's the way we're supposed to work. We're supposed to be states united. That's why that's what the name is, not states unified. We're supposed to have all states have different things. But that's neither here nor there. Let's get back
to the federal government should be protecting our rights. So,
right. The federal government should be protecting the rights of individuals. And, states get to figure out what is their societal norm.
Right on. So, are you guys
However-
ready?
However, the
Yeah.
Constitution provides a floor of rights,
Yep,
and
absolutely.
that's very important to remember in this discussion. Is that it is a federal government, and
It- And the
intentionally
sole purpose, I agree with you, the sole purpose of the federal government, or the most important purpose, is to defend all of the rights in the Constitution. Guaranteed. I mean, specifically, the language in the Constitution is such, it doesn't say you have the right to do this. It doesn't say you have the right to do that. It says Congress shall make no laws. There shall, the right shall not be infringed. The people
Right.
shall be free from unreasonable search and seizures. There's a very specific instruction saying you don't have this power, but be damn sure you don't make any laws restricting people's rights to do these things.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Time for the news quiz. Are you guys
ready.
feeling very quizzical? All right. Question number 1. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a controversial visit to which area this week, angering a nearby world power? Ukraine,
Hogwarts.
South Korea, Taiwan, or Gaza Strip?
It's
Taiwan.
Taiwan.
It was Taiwan.
Taiwan.
I will say it was a dumb idea. I mean, here's the thing. So first of all, the nice thing about it is the Chinese are being comparably dumb. If the Chinese were smart, what they would do is say, you know what, you're going to do that? We're going to give all of our best tanks right now to Russia to go use in the Ukraine. There you go, United States.
You
That's
know,
what you get to Taiwan.
Yeah.
Recently, a male congressional delegation visited Taiwan, and there was not a big stink about it. So I think she did the right thing.
If we weren't engaged in the conflict in Ukraine, I would say yes. I think in the long run, the blowback, sooner or later, China's going to figure out that's the right way to get back at us, and it's going to cost another million lives in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
When China comes in on Russia's side. But
All right. Question number 2. My favorite story of the week: primary voters in which state struck down a proposed amendment to the state's constitution that would have outlawed abortion? Washington,
Kansas.
Missouri.
baby.
Yes.
Kansas,
carry on-
bloody Kansas.
Carry on, my wayward sons.
It's pretty
And
surprising too, because Kansas is a super red state.
Yeah, but it
and-
does have a Democratic governor, so it's. I mean, there are some.
It has a
Something
Democratic
there.
governor through one of those weird things, though, like where the Republican vote was split, right? It was Sam Brown. Oh, no. What happened was Sam Brownback had done that crazy tax plan. I don't remember exactly what happened.
Yeah,
The
but-
GOP kind of screwed it up. But I
yeah.
think they're
The
legislating
partisan
overall.
registration, partisan registration in Kansas is overwhelmingly Republican, and the
Right.
message that this vote sends,
Yep.
to me, says that Republicans are not on board, especially Republican women probably are not on board with the push to make abortion illegal and punish women for their choices. So I guess we can talk a little bit about it now. Do you think this does change the calculus for the 2022 election?
I hope
Absolutely.
so. I mean, first of all, I really hope that it costs the Republicans the House, because I think they were thinking they were going to take back the House. 538 doesn't think so, but that was before Kansas.
Yeah.
I think that now there's going to be a lot more push and a lot more saying, you know what, fuck those guys. If that's what you are, if you are a person who voted for that, and it's pretty easy to find people's voting records around this place,
Right.
push them out. So I'm a little bit hopeful that it's more of a unity position than anything else we've had in modern politics, something that right and left can get together and agree upon. Sadly, I think the last thing that we've agreed upon this much was invading Iraq.
Well, invading Afghanistan, we did not agree on invading Iraq.
Right.
Right.
Well-
Afghanistan, yes.
Right, exactly. But to that extent, maybe this can be a unifying force in a war in a country that is, trying to be splintered by political parties. We talked about the fact One of the other stories that's sort of related to this, in Michigan, there will be no black representative from Detroit. And the reason why, I'm sorry, what did you say, Kara?
That's
Kara?
ridiculous.
It is
Ridiculous.
ridiculous. And it's one of those things that it's totally unintended consequences because the Democrats actually did the redistricting. Well, lesser of two evils is still two evils, Kyle. But
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm guessing that Kyle V in the CV. I'm assuming CV means that you're working on a carrier somewhere. So I hope you make it home soon, brother. The Michigan thing was fascinating because it goes to the point that nobody cares about representation, not Republicans or Democrats. What they care about is establishing safe seats. And so, the Democratic Party decided that the safest seat was not to have, a predominantly black district in Detroit, but instead to split Detroit so that the Democratic suburbs, which were much stronger, right, which weren't going to elect an AOC, because that was the problem, right? They're worried that inner city Detroit might elect a progressive Democrat, an AOC, an Ayanna Pressley, something like that. So instead, they split up Detroit. So all the white suburbs are now majority parts of it and just little pieces of Detroit. And all the white suburbs are electing white people. So Detroit is not going to have any black representatives, which is just right. I'm not saying this is a bad thing about Democrats. I'm saying this is a bad thing about party infrastructure because the parties don't want to see moderates or extremists get elected. They just want the people who are on board with the party agenda. And that's all they care about. And if you're a strategist, you could easily go from becoming a Republican strategist to a Democratic strategist because that part of it is completely apolitical.
Yep.
It's only about math and numbers.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Question number 3. Far-right pundit Alex Jones was in court this week for hearings regarding one of the several lawsuits that have been brought against him in recent years. Which topic is at the center of the lawsuits? The
Sandy Hook.
Yep, Sandy Hook massacre.
Yep.
Sued by several.
This is what we do in my classroom. CNN 10.
Nice.
I don't think there's any good jokes to be made there.
Sure there are.
Well,
Sure
unfortunately, he won't go to jail, right? There's no debtors' prisons. So he's just going to declare bankruptcy, and that's going to be the end of it, unfortunately.
But he was exchanging intimate texts with Roger Stone, which there's a lot of humor in that.
Maybe. I mean, my favorite thing about it was what was the joke we made? Was it last week, 2 weeks ago? Somebody did just get sentenced to jail on the January 6th thing.
Yeah, some guy got 7 years or something like that.
Who was it though? But it was a
oh god.
Either presidential candidate or vice presidential candidate.
No, Bannon. Bannon got sentenced for contempt.
Right. Steve Bannon got sentenced. And here's the thing. Steve Bannon is a guy who had presidential ambitions. But now he's never going to get to be president, but at least he'll get to be somebody's first lady in jail.
Oh.
It's a terrible joke.
It is.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Not really a dad joke either.
Well, Alex still with the texts that were sent to his opposing lawyer. Thanks, lawyer.
That was beautiful.
So it's been subpoenaed by the January 6th. I don't know if I think the DOJ requested the text as well. Started some of their investigation. Apparently, his wife has also requested the text as well because it does discuss. Well, it does discuss financial matters, and that maybe where he's hiding his money, so she might be able to seek greater alimony.
Right.
Right.
And that's going to be interesting because how much will his bankruptcy affect her alimony?
Well, and it's going to be harder for him to declare bankruptcy if he's shown to have the money to be able to pay these loans.
Yeah, I mean, what was the last thing that came out? 47 million.
49,
I
49.9.
don't think he has that kind of money.
They were saying that during some of the heights of it, he was getting like $150,000 a day,
$800,000 a day.
$800,000 a day. That's
It's a lot of money.
that's some scratch.
Yep.
Let's see. Question number 4. Joe Biden announced this week that a U.S. drone strike had killed the world's most wanted terrorist. Who was assassinated? Who's associated with which group?
Al Qaeda.
Al Qaeda. Yes.
I thought he was Italian. You're right. Al Qaeda.
Yep.
Notice that's my Sunni pronunciation.
Well, it was Shiite, man.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Ayman Zawahiri was killed in that drone strike.
I mean, he was the number 2 guy for forever. Took over. I mean, definitely a bad guy, but it is a troubling thing that we still. I don't know. I confess to being a little torn on things like this. This is a bad guy. He's done some really bad things. I do think that we're at war with them. So,
Sure. Although technically, we're no longer at war with Afghanistan, and this was a strike within the borders of Afghanistan, who we're technically still not at war with.
In many ways, though, I mean, but he's not in Afghanistan, right? He's in his own little private house where he doesn't admit the authority of the Afghan government. It's not like we could ask whoever's in charge to go arrest him or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, here's the question.
Okay.
Do you think the Afghanis gave their blessing?
I think they were probably not consulted.
I wonder if the Afghanis actually gave them the intelligence, though.
I doubt it, just because, I mean, our capacity in intelligence gathering is pretty strong. Whether electronic or satellite surveillance or drones or whatever. So it just doesn't seem like the thing the Taliban would do. Maybe there was some quid pro quo, but I think what's interesting about it is, right, they said that it was timed so that he was out on his balcony and there was nobody else around. And there were, no civilian casualties.
The weapon they used was interesting. It was this Ginsu missile, as they're calling it.
I actually don't know anything about it.
Yeah, the missile was not like an explosive weapon. It was like a missile of swords.
Really?
The drawing that I saw of it was the reason why I know civilian casualties is that it was a missile that cut them up.
Like flechettes, essentially.
Yeah. So
interesting, sort of a shotgun missile.
Shorter. Yeah.
That's well, I mean, I'm glad that we have things that are that targeted, that they've come up with things that are not meant to reduce the possibility of civilian casualties.
Yeah.
Well,
all right. Question number 5. Sad story for me. Baseball broadcasting legend Vin Scully died this week at the age of 94. Which team did he famously call games for during his long and remarkable career?
The Dodgers.
The Dodgers. Yeah, he moved with the team. He started with the team when they were in Brooklyn, moved all the way to LA, and called games up until 2017, I think.
He called games with Jackie Robinson, right?
Yeah, called games with Jackie Robinson. He called Jackie Robinson's games during his career. Sandy Koufax, the amount of legends that he worked with is amazing. And I related when I heard news of his passing. One of my favorite memories as a child was sitting with my dad watching the NBC game of the week with him and Joe Garagiola behind the mic, calling the games, and that's where I developed my love for baseball, was watching Vin Scully call the games, even though it wasn't for the Dodgers per se.
It's interesting to think that he was 65 at the time.
Yeah, yeah. He's
Right.
in his 60s and had been calling, games for almost 40 years with the Dodgers at that point. So, um, but yeah,
I
Vin
did,
Scully
I
passed
did
away.
bring back memories of that for sure.
What was that?
It did bring
What'd you say?
back memories of Dad for sure. And we
Yeah,
were very lucky
absolutely.
that we grew up with a dad who's a baseball guy. He loved it. He taught us the love of the game.
Yep.
It was a nice memory.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Let's see. We also lost Star Trek actress Nichelle Nichols, who passed away at the age of 89. Which iconic role did she bring to life?
Uhura.
Yes, Lieutenant Nyota
Yep.
Uhura.
I know that they established her first name in the original series.
I don't know.
That's nerds. Chime in the comments.
But yeah, she portrayed
Do we have nerds?
communications officer.
Actually, they're all on this side of the camera.
Yeah, pretty much. Um,
That's true.
when Star Trek began in 1966, Nichols was a television rarity, a black woman in a notable role on a primetime television series. Some of the things that she did was a woman in a leadership position, really. The first interracial kiss on camera, and just an amazing career, trailblazer, and definitely the nerd world is very sad
Well,
to see her
and
pass.
so her character's name was actually meant to be Sulu. However, they said, you know what? That sounds too much like Zulu. And if we have a black character with that name, it's going to be a disaster. So let's make the other guy Sulu, and we'll
Huh,
pick something out of Swahili. And of course, Uhura means freedom in Swahili.
that's awesome.
Love love that.
Nerds on this side of the camera.
All right.
I think he's talking about Gene
Okay.
Roddenberry there.
All right. Question number 7. U.S. household debt passed which massive figure this week, according to the New York Federal Reserve? 800 billion, 1 trillion, 8 trillion, or 16 trillion?
I don't know this because I haven't heard it, but it's got to be 16 trillion. The economy is over 4 trillion a year, so 1
Personal
trillion would be
debt?
nothing.
I wouldn't be.
I missed a lot of news this week.
What do you think? You think that's too much, Dave?
No,
You
I
want to
think
go 8 trillion?
no, I think 16 trillion. So I mean, the federal government is 30 trillion in debt.
We know
and-
college debt is over 20 trillion. So
Yep, there it is.
Yeah.
$16 trillion figure.
Well,
That's half of the federal debt is
Right.
We hold half of what the federal debt is.
Yep. It's pretty astonishing. I mean, what is astonishing too is you look at what the GDP of the United States is, and I don't know what it is off the top of my head. It used to be around 4 trillion. I'm just going to look it up real quick. Holy crap! I could not be more out of date. The GDP of the United States last year was $21 trillion.
Wow.
Yep.
Interesting.
Compared to that is actually 50% higher than China's.
Yeah.
To put things in context. Now, of course, we got more people than China, but I'm kidding. We don't have more people than China.
Like what?
But it is an astonishing thing. We think about the debt and where we are in terms of our production. It's not outrageous, except that it all adds up eventually.
Yeah.
Pretty soon you're talking some real money.
Yep, exactly. $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. And pretty soon you're talking real money.
That's right. All right. Question number 8. Taco Bell has brought back which much loved menu item after its initial return was hampered by high demand and product shortages? Mexican pizza, nacho fries, Choco Taco, or double decker taco?
Mexican pizza, baby.
Yeah, Mexican pizza.
Reading the question, you know how it said hampered. I thought it said hamster. And I'm like, oh, they're doing the Peruvian hamster thing. That would be astonishing.
Mm.
Or is it guinea pig? I think it's guinea pig.
Number 9,
That's
the sports
funny.
world is in turmoil after NFL quarterback Deshaun Watson was suspended just 6 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy and private meetings with massage therapists. Which
Barring
team
you
does
and I from
Watson?
answering this question, Dave.
What's that?
I'm barring you and I from answering this question.
Yeah.
Only Kara, you're on answering all the sports questions from here on in.
Which team does
Oh,
Watson
nice.
play for?
Guess. You can guess if you don't know.
The 4
Dallas
choices
Cowboys.
are what?
I think it was the Dallas Cowboys.
No.
All right, it's the Cleveland Browns,
Eh,
which is funny because first of all, the Browns got
Okay.
rid of a guy who, okay, people might not like Baker Mayfield as the greatest quarterback ever. Everybody will agree that he is a nice guy, an upstanding young man. No blemishes on his characters. And the Cleveland team is pretty good. He had an off year, but
He had an off year because he was injured.
exactly.
He was barely making it through games, and
Yeah. And instead,
they blamed it on him.
right. And you know what?
Hmm.
I truly believe innocent until proven guilty, but you don't have 24 lawsuits for sexual harassment and be completely innocent. I just volume speaks for something there.
Yeah. Right. No, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Final question for a perfect score. Through those still painfully high U.S. gas prices have been falling for more than 50 days. What was the record high average price for a gallon of gas set in the middle of June? $6.12, $5.02,
I think it was
$4.89, or $5.94.
I'm going to say 502.
502.
502. Correct.
Yeah, 10 out of 10,
10,
baby.
10.
We are ready for Jeopardy.
That's right. I was on the radio today, or radio on Thursday. One of the co-hosts was a former 5-time Jeopardy champion, Bob
Really?
Fleener, who ran the newspaper in my town. But yeah,
Did they talk about, I guess Ken Jennings wasn't announced until yesterday.
what is Ken Jennings the solo, or is he going to
He's
go
the
with-
solo permanent host from now on.
I like Mayim Bialik.
I like Mayim, but I mean, listen, I like Mayim. She's my culture. But you can't expect to push attachment parenting and stuff like that and have that be okay on mainstream media. So
When you say
Okay.
attachment parenting, what do you mean?
I really don't know everything about it, but children sleeping in your bed until late. Let me read a little bit more about it. There's a lot of controversial stuff about it.
That's interesting.
And
People should do it.
promoting the attachment of parent and infant, not only by maximizing endearment and empathy, by continual body closeness and touching. And I mean, there's some stuff about it that's a lot of good. If you read about it, though, I think, it's controversial. And I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm saying that it's
Mhm.
controversial. And so
I
if
just
you're going to be an
think-
advocate for something that's controversial, that's going to be hard for the mainstream media to take.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of
Excuse me.
a little bit of dismay over nothing. It's kind of a manufactured.
I do believe, my partner said that a man would not have lost a job for that issue.
No.
Like a man can come in with a little bit of controversy. Like if you were Charlton Heston talking about guns, like, yeah, sure, keep hosting the show. So
Sure.
I do hear that part of it.
So other
Aaron-
things.
Yeah,
Yo,
I mean, right?
what was that,
Uh,
Kara?
Attachment parenting believes that
I
sleep
just
training
said
is
people
bad.
should be able to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually don't know what sleep
That sleep
training is.
what?
They believe that sleep training is bad, which I don't know what sleep training actually is because I don't have any children. But I guess it has something to do with teaching your child how to sleep in their bed at night. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think wherever people are comfortable with that. I mean, my kids would come into my bed at night. It was fine. You know, when your kids are little, sleeping with them, as long as somebody's sleeping, my God, I can tell you some stories. I don't really have a, a feeling one way or another about it. People should do what works for them. And when you have
Yeah.
small children, you'll take sleep however it comes.
Right.
I promise.
Sure. You're
All
right.
right.
Anyway,
All right. So, in other news this week, Biden, the Senate actually passed the Inflation Reduction Act, with lumps together action on the economy, prescription drugs, and climate change. I'm going to say, I'm the cynic here. I'm going to say that none of this is going to work out the way that they plan.
no, I mean, it's unfortunately, I mean, first of all, the one thing that would have worked, that if like, the worst thing about it is that the bill that I would have liked to see, which was completely unnecessary, but capping the price on insulin, could
Oh my
immediately
God.
be fixed, right, by allowing insulin to be bought overseas, because insulin is cheaper than $35 overseas.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it would it would start the floodgates of American drug companies have to keep competing against foreign drug companies. Fact of the matter
Oh,
is, just like foreign companies can make cars a lot cheaper, they can make drugs a lot cheaper than us too, because they have less labor costs.
Well, not only
Um,
that, but the one of the things they pulled out of the bill at the last minute was, they capped Medicare drug charges. They gave the Medicare the ability to negotiate prices, but uh, everything else was taken off the table. So all those costs that Medicare was paying now will be passed on to us as consumers for our regular insurance.
right. Eh, and they did put through a tax on a high-end corporate income tax, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a weird thing. Most economists, there's a great NPR article on this. Right and left economists agree corporate income tax is a terrible idea. What's wrong with what will corporations do if they have more money? Will they pay their executives more? Well, that would be great, because personal income tax is higher than the corporate income tax. Will they hire more people? Will they put more money in research and development? All of those things you could do a good job on. But for politicians, it's always popular to vote for a corporate income tax. You're like, hey, I'm saving you money because I'm taxing the corporations instead of taxing the people. But I agree, Craig. However, even if he's from Oklahoma, but right, taxes always get passed through to the consumer, right? Corporations don't pay taxes. They have a profit margin. It is what it is. And if you tell them that their costs are going to go up 4%, because that's the increase in their taxes, they're just going to raise prices by 4%.
Yeah. I mean, I can see the counter argument is that you pay the CEOs that money. The CEOs have as many loopholes as
Sure.
and they don't pay anything close to what they are supposed to pay. I you know I would love to see if we were ever going to modify the tax code and still have taxes. I would like to have a system without these massive loopholes.
Sure. I mean, the problem, the system without loopholes is a consumption tax,
Yeah.
right? You just have no exceptions for consumption tax, except for food, water. That's it. Everything else gets taxed, and then you can do the prebate and all that other stuff to make it so that it's not a regressive tax, and that'll be fine as long as there is an income tax, and we have a government that is controlled by people who have a lot of money. There are going to be loopholes.
Yeah.
There's nothing we can do about it, and those loopholes are always for political favorites. So in this case, it just so happens that the big corporations who are not favorites of government right now because they threaten their power are the ones who they're going to charge these big taxes to. But you could actually go after hedge fund managers, right? You could go after trial lawyers who, trial lawyers, I believe, give to the Democratic Party 90%. It's a really striking phenomenon because they want lots of laws so they can be lawyers. And, the same thing for Republicans, right? Republicans give tax break to energy companies, subsidies to energy companies because they give them to them. The tax law is just political football, and it's going to be manipulated by whoever's in power. And so
Absolutely.
the problem is the people who get screwed by it are the people who have no power. So it's not Republican or Democrat. It's the elite who get the things that they want and the rest of us who don't.
Absolutely. Another piece of legislation that passed this week is on the way to the president for signature is the PACT Act. It is an expansion of veterans benefits presumptive conditions related to not only Agent Orange, but toxic exposure
Burn pits.
during the burn pits. Not just toxic exposure, increased asthma for serving in the Middle East and North Africa. So there's a whole lot of things that are going into this. It's going to make me a very, very busy person over the next several years.
How so? How is this going to increase your workload?
One is going to increase the number of claims, but for me personally, we have to code in all these new conditions. We've got to make sure that the our systems will apply the right rates at the right time and pay the veteran the right amount. We're going to have to go back several years on some of these things.
Is it retroactive?
I don't know how retroactive. I haven't dug that far into the bill. I don't know how retroactive it's going to be,
Yeah.
but I think there's going to be some retroactivity, especially with veterans who've claimed some of these conditions prior and were denied. But presumption means that if you're a veteran who has been diagnosed with an illness, no matter when, generally it's a year outside of service that you have to be you have to show some kind of illness from service. But anytime, like if you served 8 years ago and say you have asthma or some kind of rare cancer of the lung, you can say I served in Iraq this period of time, and we're already going to concede service connection for those conditions.
Interesting.
So
That's very interesting. I got a message from a friend that indeed Uhura's first name was not known until the J.J. Abrams reboot. So they created it in the new Star Trek.
Okay. Let's see. We'd already talked about Kansas defeating the constitutional challenge. I wish Kara was back on because this is a story that I'd like to get her take on. Democrats are playing. No worries. Democrats are playing a very dangerous game in the primaries, supporting these Trump Republican candidates with money in places where they can crossover vote. They're voting for them to get them into the general election with the idea that a compromised Trump Republican is going to be easier to defeat.
Yep.
Dangerous game. I'm with you on that. I've never been a big fan of cynical politics, and you know that I'm one of those true believers, and this is painful for me to watch.
Yeah. So one of the examples this week was a gentleman named Pete Meyer who actually voted for impeachment. Actually, two people who voted for impeachment on Tuesday lost their primaries. Pete Meyer lost it to a Trump election denying Republican. Ironically, this might be the only black representative in Michigan if he's successful in the election. But people say that these guys are beatable, but that was the same thing they were saying about Trump in 2016. let's get Trump into the general election against Hillary. We'll clean the clean the floor with them, and we saw what happened with that.
Yeah, we do have an interesting scenario here in Maryland where the Trump candidate won, and so our current governor Larry Hogan is a Charlie Baker sort of Republican, a Republican elected in a blue state, and a popular Republican.
Yeah.
And he certainly had plenty of words with Trump during the candidacy. Never went to the White House, even though it's a 25-minute drive. Granted, it's a 25-minute drive at midnight, but
Yeah.
the rest of the day, it could be longer from Annapolis, but it's still not far as the crow flies. But so the candidate that he was supporting lost in the primary to a guy that he referred to as a QAnon whack job. So we have a QAnon whack job running as a Republican, and then an extremely progressive Democrat, I would say further left than AOC or Bernie Sanders, really running on free college and, you know, a lot of...
We have free college here in New Mexico now. Pretty happy about that.
You have free state college or free
state college, university.
I don't have any problems. You could, every state could do that now.
Yeah,
every state could implement that, and I would say New Mexico is the model. Everybody should do what New Mexico is doing. The federal government shouldn't be doing it. And forgiveness of student loans and all those other things. But so Thursday, Hogan, the governor, said, well, you know, that guy, the right guy is running, who they asked him who's going to vote. So that guy's a QAnon whack job. He's like, we're going to have to take a serious look at the third party candidate, the Libertarian, who has more executive office experience than either one of these guys. And that's true because David Lasher, the Libertarian Party candidate, worked in the Hogan administration. So I think that for sure, David Lasher is going to get invited into the debates. And then I think about Jesse Ventura, right? He's polling at 10% as an independent. He gets invited into the debates and he wins the election. So I think that Lasher has a shot here to really make a difference.
Yeah, the Democrat is I don't think he's run for office before.
No.
And so there's always the chance that they could end up shooting themselves in the foot because of this lack of general.
Yeah, no, I'm serious that I think Lasher has got a good shot at this. And that's why, like, so I have actually, you know, I said I was going to stay out of politics for a long time, but I am stepping up and assuming the role of press secretary for the Lasher campaign.
Nice.
We're going to get him in there. And I'm also happy to announce that David Valente will be working in Western Maryland to support the Lasher campaign in whatever role I can think of. It's not that far from you, right? How far are you? What's the closest place to you in Maryland?
I am like a 3-minute drive from Maryland.
Done. You are hired for whatever I can think of.
Just south of Hagerstown.
All right. So maybe you'll be a body person at an event in Hagerstown or something.
There we go.
We need something. That's the thing. When the campaign blows up, a lot of Republicans are going to be really mad at David Lasher, and we're going to need to have body people at events.
Probably. So. Yeah. All right. So we are just about done for the week. So last thing for the week, the James Webb Space Telescope keeps dropping amazing pictures, and this one of a cartwheel galaxy 500 million light years away from us. Absolutely amazing. This is a composite image of near infrared and medium infrared light. You can see these two galaxies off in the background, but this is just an amazing photograph.
That's pretty cool. That is a really cool photograph.
The other piece of news, there was a guy that released a picture of
Lebanese bologna, right?
It was chorizo. And I'm disappointed that there isn't a chorizo there isn't a chorizo giant red star out there. That
I guarantee you somebody's going to name something chorizo at some point in the future.
absolutely, yes. They're going to find a massive red star and they're going to name it chorizo.
Did you know that chorizo is made specifically from the salivary glands of a pig?
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Yes. It is.
Before we get offline here, and I kind of need to, because we've still got a kid in the hospital. We got one going tomorrow.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Matthew is still healing from his pancreatitis. They removed his gallbladder Thursday, but he's not well enough to leave the hospital yet. So we're still working with that. Amanda just got home from the hospital from spending the day with him. And then Tanner is having his laser surgery tomorrow for his kidney stone. So it's been a really wacky time. But I did want to mention the targeted killings of most.
Yes. Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's really shaken our community. Albuquerque at large, the Muslim community. But if you're not familiar, in the last 9 months and 3 of them in the last 2 weeks, Muslim Americans have been killed in ambushes. Oh, shoot.
Yeah, I see you. You're still there.
Okay. Well, my phone's shutting down.
And then we lost her. Yeah, so I'll pick up the story from here. The Albuquerque police is actually, I think the FBI are now involved with this incident. In that there have been several incidents where Muslims have been ambushed and shot outside of either their vehicles or businesses in Albuquerque. It's a larger community. Again, when large diasporas of people are forced to leave their countries, the United States government tends to settle them in communities within the United States. So, like especially for Arabs up in the Dearborn, Michigan area, some in Atlanta, some in Albuquerque as well. These large diaspora communities are integral, especially the growth in New Mexico from the Gulf War has been exponential, and it's sad to see something like this happen. And I hate to see it for the Muslim community within New Mexico, because until this person's brought to justice, they're going to be living in fear.
Yeah.
And so if anybody's out in New Mexico and sees what's going on or sees something, please report it, and hopefully we can bring these people to justice. But
that would be nice.
All right, sir, you got anything else for the week that you want to talk about?
Not much. I got a podcast coming out on Monday, going to be on Apple Podcasts, called I don't remember what it's called, but it's one of my finest pieces in a long time. I was interviewed by these guys. I will share links to it on my personal page and on the People for Liberty page. So please make sure to turn it in. And People for Liberty, if you go peopleforliberty.org/legislation, you'll see the great work of our new legislative director, Celeste Garrett. We have legislation for all 50 states right now that you can get involved in and either support it or oppose it, depending on which piece of legislation is, whether it enhances or decreases liberty. And we're looking for more. So if you know of any legislation in a state house, I don't need to know about the Biden Build Back Better, whatever this thing is called now. I know that that's anti-liberty. We're not focusing on federal legislation. We're only focusing on legislation in state houses. But if you know of something in your state that you think, you know what, if I could get 10 people to go with me to go to the state house and talk to people about it, we might be able to defeat this bill. We want you to tell us about it. We want to build the organization, and we want to get you those 10 volunteers to go with you. So peopleforliberty.org/legislation. And a shout out to Celeste Garrett, who is our legislative
Yes.
director.
Celeste is awesome.
Yep. That's it. That's all I got.
That's all you got? All right. Thanks, Craig, for watching. Thanks to the folks watching on Facebook, the Twitch, and YouTube. I also this week was named a content creator for LinkedIn. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, thanks for watching. I don't get those numbers on the broadcast. And as always, the folks on TikTok and back here that I broadcast live to. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to everyone next week at 10 p.m. Take care, everybody.
Hi, guys. Good